everyone, welcome back to Manager IQ's interview series. Alexis Donicky here, CEO and founder of Manager IQ, a place where managers can join, develop and thrive. We're excited to bring you another installment of the Manager interview series, which brings managers together so we can learn from each other and we can build our confidence and capability. And I've got another exciting installment here, and I've got Daniela Owen Whitford, who is a former corporate executive with 20 years of leadership experience in operations, retail, customer service, and large-scale transformation. Dani left the corporate world after experiencing burnout to become the founder and CEO of Pioneera to help prevent burnout from happening to others. Dani built a great team who brought her vision of mental health bot called Indie to life. Indie strives to help people and companies manage stress, prevent burnout, and create great places to work. I just love that. But Dani, welcome. How are you?
Thank you, Lex. It's great to be here. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yes, I'm really good. Thank you. Really good. I think we mentioned before we're excited about the different changes in lockdown that's happening for both Sydney and Melbourne. So it's an exciting time at the moment, which is
and a good time for our mental health, actually, to get outside a bit. So
yes. And I would just love to hear a little bit more from you around Pioneer and your vision and what you're looking to do in your journey to date, if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Yeah, sure. I mean, as you talked about in the intro, I didn't realize it's 20 years. It makes me sound very old. As you talked about my journey through my career, and I have seen it with a lot of my friends and colleagues. It's very much the same. We work very hard and we're very committed to what we do. And so as a consequence, we don't always see the signs that our bodies are giving us to look after ourselves. And for me, that kind of manifested in burnout in 2016. And so what I noticed is I'd see emails from people that would say, here we go again, I don't want to do this anymore. And I would step in and help them, and they would go on and, be okay and deliver. And I really just wanted to automate that. So Pioneera just looks for the markers of stress and wellness in language. And then when it sees that, it sends you a tip to help you de-stress in real time. So the psychological sort of basis is that we can self-regulate if we catch it early. So that's what we decided to build. So I guess I wanted to use my not so great experience to help prevent that in others.
Yeah, well, I think it sounds like a wonderful and meaningful, business and a problem to solve for sure. And I think you're right. We see such significant mental health issues that happen in the workplace. But if we had seen them or caught them so much earlier, they're a lot easier to overcome rather than, a lot further down the line when they're just like much more entrenched issues for individuals. So I think it's such a fantastic opportunity, really.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Because when we talk about mental health, that's a spectrum of mental health. So we have, looking after ourselves, and you might call it well-being or anything at this end. And then you have mental ill health at the other end. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to help people in those very early stages. Because as I said, the body can self-regulate, but also we can learn good habits and we can learn good patterns. But we are biased to our own mental state. So like we have any unconscious bias for a range of things, we also have an unconscious bias towards ourselves. So what we do is, because our system is a third party can help us see something that we are biased to ourselves. So if we can keep people in that kind of productive zone, that mentally well zone, keep their resilience high, then they can deal with the knocks of life and the sort of pressure of a workplace, and they can bounce back. So that's what we're doing, is working that very early end before and as you get to the, if you get to the mental ill health end, then of course you need medical intervention and stuff like that. We're helping people stay in that early stage.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. I love what you're doing, and we could talk about it for ages, but what we will do is we'll make sure that we get some contact details for any person or organization who's interested to hear more about you. They can get in touch. So we'll certainly do that.
Love that. Thank you.
Not a problem. So we're here to talk about your experience as a manager, and maybe if you want to shine a little bit of light, particularly on your career, which relates to, when you became a manager and your experience in that area.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. So I became a manager probably in my early 20s, maybe mid-20s actually. And I did it because I went to a new company. So I went to a new company to get this new job. And as I started, they said, oh, by the way, you'll have 3 or 4 people that you need to manage. And I was like, oh, really? Like, so that told me two things. Firstly, management and leadership wasn't valued in that company because it wasn't part of the decision-making process to hire me. So I thought, wow, okay, that sends a really interesting signal about that. But then secondly, there was a real mix of people in that team, and there were people that were younger than me, but quite a few that were older than me, more experienced. I was now between them and the big kind of boss of the department. They didn't want someone between them and the boss. So it was a really kind of interesting experience. I was very lucky because my mum had quite a bit of leadership, and my mum's a social worker. So she was training social workers and being leaders. So she was a good go-to, because a couple of people, one person in particular was really difficult and would just cry in every meeting I tried to have a performance discussion. They would just cry, and I'd be like, oh, I'm so sorry. And my mum would be like, no, sit there with tissues and wait for them to stop. Like, okay. So she was really good. So that gave me a really good grounding, and that was kind of my early stage. Then I moved on, actually had a couple of jobs, and then it ended landing in NRMA, which at the time was NRMA. It's now IAG. And I was very fortunate. I got lots of great opportunities, and I went in to manage a team on a maternity leave position, and then the person came back to the maternity leave role, and then I went on to other divisions, and I just started managing groups of people. And then I went off, interestingly, but I never thought that much about leadership being a skill. It was just something that I did as part of my other jobs. Then I went off and had my first child, and I was made redundant during that period of having a child and being on mat leave, like many women do. And I went to go back to work, and the job that they were offering me was in the sales team, as actually part of the sales leadership team. And I remember saying to the state manager at the time, I'm not a salesperson. Like, I don't have a sales background. Everyone else in the team had a really strong sales background. And he said to me, I don't need you. I have a lot of salespeople. I don't need you for your sales skill. I need you for your leadership skills. Like, we need leaders. And I was like, oh, what do you mean? And then he explained it, and I'm like, oh, this is the first time I actually thought that leadership was a skill and valued in and of itself. And I was very fortunate. I did a lot of leadership training and coaching and stuff like that. So I was able to build my leadership expertise. And then I guess over time, my roles and my experience just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then I started leading people that led people. So I guess, leaders of leaders, which was a bit different again. And through the whole time, I guess I stayed, this is me in general, but I stayed quite curious and quite open. And I always sought feedback, and I tried to take the opportunity to continue to develop that leadership skill as much as I was my technical skill. And now that I'm in a startup that doesn't have the same level of resource or support that you have in a big corporate, I talk to my team quite a bit about leadership and do they want to step into leadership and what does that look like? And I just had a call actually with one of my team that's moving more into a leadership role. So we're going to set up a development plan for him. And part of that is actually leadership as much as his technical skills. So I've had some good opportunities to develop that along the way.
Yeah. Wow, that's so fantastic. And there's so many bits and pieces I would love to unpick, but I'll try and do a few. But the one thing that I thought was so fascinating when you mentioned right at the beginning that you went into a role that had management as part of it, but it wasn't part of the leadership decision-making process when they employed you because you hadn't had that experience. So had they employed you more for your technical expertise in the first instance? Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So that was especially at that entry-level manager role.
Yeah, I think, and I think a few things happened in the workplace and some things changed around. But yes, absolutely, all of the interview, all of the negotiation of the role, everything was around my technical expertise. It was a communications kind of, I was in corporate affairs, communications, that sort of area, investor relations. So that was what it was all about. And then I arrived, and they're like, oh, by the way, here are these three people. And not even in the same discipline. So one was a communications person, but the other one was like a visual artist. So one was a designer and another one was someone else. So completely different kind of capabilities, but we were all grouped together.
When you were talking about having, I guess, difficult conversations when an individual was responding in a way that was quite emotional and so forth, what was the other skills that maybe your mom or you had picked up along the way that actually helps managers handle those difficult conversations that might be highly emotional or whatever it might be?
Yeah, I learned through that instance, actually through my mum, that that was actually, in this instance, it's not always the case, but in this particular instance, we figured out that was just like a stalling tactic, because that person had also used it with my boss, who was their boss before. We talked and they're like, oh, yeah, that's what they do. So I'm like, oh, okay. So it was great in terms of me identifying stalling tactics and resistance and how to deal with that. And so we tried a couple of things and we figured that out in the end. As time went on, I guess what I realized is that there's quite a fine line between being responsible for someone and being compassionate and considerate. So and those difficult conversations, whilst they're incredibly difficult, usually end up in a good place if you do them with compassion and respect, because it's actually it's the honesty and the transparency that other person values. So they usually know that something's not quite right. And I've had instances where we've had to move people on and done all that sort of stuff, really difficult stuff. But if you're very clear and transparent with people, this is what it is, this is why, and this is what it means for you. And sometimes it's really awful. There are hysterics and crying and threats and all that sort of stuff. But usually because that person, and I'm very considerate that person is usually in pain. So I'm like, well, how can I lessen their pain? But still I have become very sort of, not matter of fact, but just move from step to step to step, because ultimately I've had several instances where that person's come back and said, thank you, actually, you're right, thank you, and it was time for me to go, or it's time for me to change. So whilst those tough conversations are really tough, usually if you do them with respect and compassion for the other person, then it usually ends up in a good place, but also not to be defensive and triggered in those conversations, because sometimes we take it all on. That's what I mean about being responsible. We take it all on and we feel terrible and we have to fix the situation. We have to make that person feel better. And, you can then become quite defensive. So you've just got to remember it's actually not about you half the time.
Yeah, I mean, those are such wonderful thoughts there. And it's around that active listening, I think it's part of the compassion piece. It's around making sure that you're not having these preconceived ideas around what you think the issue is. And it's more around taking the time to really sit and kind of be curious, poke at the problem a little bit more and really understand what they're saying. And then often it kind of almost turns into a bit of a coaching scenario where they might actually get there themselves, around these hard, challenging conversations. But it's almost a gift if we can think about that. It's an investment in our people if we do have these difficult conversations. And like you said, because there can be good outcomes for that individual, because if they're that way, they're not happy where they're at right now either. So if you can get them into a happier place in the organization or somewhere else, that's a win for everybody in the end.
Look, I totally agree. Absolutely. It's a win for the individual, it's for the team, for the customer, the whole lot for the company. I think also you can be very clear and transparent with people through the process too. Like, as I said, I was just talking to one of my team members about a development plan, because I want him to be successful. So I want to get to the next 3 months and I want him to be super clear on what I'm going to measure him against so he can get there. And if he gets there, which I'm pretty sure he will, awesome. Like, he's going to be a superstar, right? I'm thrilled for him. But if he doesn't, and we have to have some difficult conversations, we know what the guideposts are. Like, it's not like he's surprised or he's going to be blindsided. And that usually causes some problems. And at all, he gets nothing from me. And then in a vacuum of communication, people automatically think the negative, and then they become defensive, and then they start looking for other jobs. So I think if you can be very transparent with people about what you expect, what their role is, what success looks like. I learnt the hard way from one of my managers years ago, brilliant woman, but she would just say, do this, run an event. And I'd go, okay. And then I'd go, oh my God. So I learnt to actually then manage up to say to her, okay, well, what sort of event? And who would you like there? And what are we going to achieve? And I'd ask her, and she would laugh. Oh, here we go. Here are the 20 questions.
Yes.
But I learnt, right, these are the things that I need to be successful. And so because I stuffed up the first time when I didn't ask those questions. And she would then tell me all of that and go and be happy that I asked her all the questions. And then we go off and we deliver a pretty successful, whatever it was, event or initiative. So I think if you can give people that, but if you're a leader or even not a leader and you're listening to that, if your boss is not giving you that, then just ask them. My favorite question, what does success look like to you? How will we know we're successful? What are we celebrating?
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice to give any managers who are listening at the moment. And something that we talk about in the new manager development program that Manager IQ has around what is the role of the manager. And it actually facilitates a conversation between you and your leader. And it goes on the back of the job description. Do you understand everything that's in there, and asking different questions so that you and the leader are on the same page? Because the document is one thing, but the expectations in someone's mind around their experience and what they want for the future of that role could be quite different. So it starts to facilitate this more open dialogue between you and the leader, and much better to ask multiple questions upfront or during these different times where you need clarity, rather than, like you say, do something and it maybe doesn't quite hit the mark.
Totally. Look, totally. And also things evolve. And as we've seen through the pandemic, things evolve quickly. So the job that you came into is not necessarily the job that you might be doing 2 and 3 months later. Or if you are, you're doing it in a completely different way. So we've had a situation where a couple of people have moved around in my team as not just a result of the pandemic, but just change, as change happens over time. So then we're allocating tasks to different people. So, roles will evolve over time. So it's important to keep that dialogue going. And that also builds trust, and then builds engagement, and then all of the positive benefits we get, mental resilience and well-being, so all of the stuff that we want to achieve.
Yeah, exactly. And you're a team, like you and your leader's success relies on each other. So, like you're a team to work towards a certain goal. So if the more that you can have that trust and open communication, the better it is for you both. So it's a win-win.
Totally. Absolutely. I agree.
Think about your career. Was there a defining moment when it came to management that really springs to mind?
Look, I've got a couple. Actually, one sprung to mind that's probably not a good example of management, but the example I used before with my was about to be my boss saying, "I want you for your leadership skills," actually was a defining moment in terms of leadership. But I have a funny story about what not to do. I was talking to a team member of mine. It was quite early in my leadership journey, and it was a man, and he was just not behaving very well. And I didn't think I'd handled it very well, because I was but in hindsight, it was a perfect way. I was very direct and I was very straight. Yes, no, don't do this, which wasn't normally like me. So I thought that I'd done the wrong thing. So I came out of the room and I ran into one of my male colleagues, and I said, I don't think I did that very well. And he said, "What do you mean? What happened?" So I gave him a brief overview. He goes, "Did you yell at him?" I said, "No." He goes, "Did you throw a chair?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, then I think you're fine." I said, when did the baseline of management become throwing chairs around? That's not, given this, it was 10 years ago, but still not acceptable. So I always remember that, because I thought I'd done such a terrible job. And I realized, actually, in hindsight, it was probably a pretty good job, actually. But that my baseline actually was probably better than what I thought it was. So to yell at someone, to throw something, to, swear, whatever, never in a million years would I do that. So that was an interesting kind of moment for me to go, wow, well, I thought I was doing a tough job, but maybe my baseline, everyone's is going to be different.
Yeah.
So that kind of reminds me about good leadership and poor leadership, but also it reminds me, in leading myself, to give myself a bit of a break, that actually what I was doing was the right thing. So.
And I think as humans, you must come across this a little bit, that we always focus on the things we didn't do too well. I always remember, I played netball up to recently, and I always remember the balls that I either didn't, shoot and it went out, or I flung and they were a bit over, or I didn't catch the ball. And I think it's the same at work. We always remember those moments where we just didn't think quite happened so well. Yeah. But really, or even in a presentation, I mucked up a couple of sentences, but, an hour of the rest of the presentation was perfectly fine. And it's just such an interesting way that the human brain works, that's what it focuses on.
It's true. It's so true, because rejection is one of our most basic primal fears. So we think if we've gotten it wrong, we're going to be rejected by the group or whatever that is. So yeah, I'm the same as you. I spent a lot of time actually focusing on using positive self-talk rather than negative. So trying to find the positives and turning that into a positive and then a reinforcing kind of pattern in my mind, just to move away from that kind of, negative pattern.
Oh, that's great. Great tips. I actually just read, I can't remember the guy's name now, but he's the DS from SAS Australia. He's the main guy. He's done a book called Zero Negativity. And he also talks around how you choose to see a scenario it makes a huge difference on yourself and how you go about it, and also that positivity. So he talks about turning everything into a more positive, even if it's something you didn't do too well. Well, what did I learn from that? Okay, I learned that You know, so great book. I actually listened to it on Audible, so he was talking to it as well. But I found that to be very good. Just a few pointers, and particularly from what you just said, it kind of resonated.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you choose your mindset. And someone said to me actually a couple of years ago that your mind is a bit like your GPS system. What
Yes.
you think about is actually where your body and your everything is going to head towards. So if you're constantly thinking about the negative stuff, focusing on the stuff that you don't do well, then you're going to just continue to do that. So like, oh, okay, that's quite useful. So yes, I do sort of reframe things. I'm a big learner. I'm a big reflector. I will often say to my kids, okay, so what did you learn from that? What
Mm,
did you hear that I'm saying to you? Because often they're two different things.
yeah.
And then the same for myself. And I have to practice what I preach. So I've used that positive self-talk a lot. And my mum, I'm talking about my mum, she'll love this. She calls it radical acceptance. So she's like,
Yeah.
sometimes you just got to accept this is the way that it is. So rather than rally against it, and COVID was a really good example where people spent a lot of time rallying against it and everyone did their own thing. But I figured pretty quickly, I can't do anything about this. I can only do
Mm,
what I can do. So I will control the environment that I have and we will make the most of it. So we, played silly board games and we got a whiteboard in the kitchen to write chores, who's doing chores. And, the kids spend all day in their pajamas homeschooling, but they're online and they're doing their work. And
yeah.
so we've made the best of the situation because I just decided that that was a better way to do it. And it actually turned out to be okay. The kids don't want to go back to school now, actually. They want to
We've
stay at
had too
home.
much fun.
They've had too much fun. They want to be in their pajamas. So
Yeah, well, that's so great, and hello to your mom if she's listening as well. I think that's lovely that you keep on bringing her up, and she's been such a good role model for you. So let's flip to, I guess, have you figured out or thought of any main challenge that you faced in your career, or as your role as a manager?
I think yeah, look, I think there's a number of things that I faced actually as a leader because particularly as you get more and more as a senior leader, you've got more and more people that you're having to deal with. So we think of leadership as in like top down, right? You've got your team. So it's like 1 to 7, 10, 20, whatever you've got, like 1 to many. But
Mm-hmm.
that's usually what we think about in terms of leadership. But I think the reality is, and this is where the 360-degree tools have popped up. The reality is, as a leader, that you're actually working with a very broad group of stakeholders. And as you get more senior or as in different roles in different organizations, that can be like a few people or that can be multiple people. So that takes a lot of effort and energy. So I've learned some things about how to sort of map stakeholders and how to deal with people that has been quite helpful. My first degree majored in psych, so that was kind of useful too.
Yeah.
So that's been a really interesting learning. So leadership is not just about the people underneath you. So that's kind of what I learned. The other thing is that I thought, I've come to realize anyone and everyone is a leader. You don't technically have to have people reporting to you to be a leader because these days we have cross-functional groups, we have agile groups, we have people that move from project to project or team to team. We have the gig economy. So a big proportion, 50 to 60% of us will be working in a gig or a portfolio career in the future. So you will be part of multiple teams. So you don't technically have to be a leader to be a leader. So I talk to people about leadership skills being applicable regardless of whether or not you've got a formal kind of hard line of a team underneath you. So they're kind of the sorts of things that I've learned. I've also learned that you need to just manage your own energy and your own self, because people will take from you as much as they can because you're in a role where people come to you, they want help, whatever. So you need to manage yourself and you need to teach people to be self-sufficient without you giving them the answers all the time. So I would frequently say to my team, come to me with a solution. My door is always open. We don't have doors, but by this, the door is always open. But come to me with a solution. Don't come and dump a problem on me. I want you to come and here's a problem and here are the 4 things I've thought of. Let's talk about which one is the best one. And I'm like, yay. So they're the things I've learned.
Yeah, and I think that that's so interesting because I find as well, like now, especially when you're getting busier and busier and busier, it's just easier to give people the answers. But it's easier for that moment. It's not easier for every other moment thereafter, And I've caught myself a couple of times more recently, like playing back like a project or a certain meeting, and I thought, oh my gosh, I was the most senior person there. I kind of took over. I was really busy. I had a million things on my mind, and how much of the learning experience really was that for the individuals in the room. And so this is one of my real self-reflection exercises I'm doing at the moment, trying to work on around that constant kind of coaching and letting people bring their solutions and all that sorts of things, because I feel like in the last year in particular, now that I've got busier, I've got myself into a few bad habits. So anyway, so it's good that you brought that up, because it's I'm certainly working on it at the moment.
Yeah. And look, it's very common. It's very common because our brains want us to be efficient. Like our brains will get to the end point the fastest way possible. So it's very common and we all do it. But I have found that if you can make that investment, find a way to make that investment, that usually pays off in the end. But it does, it takes time. It's like hiring a new person and delegating work. You're like, oh, it's just quicker to do it myself. But it doesn't help in the long run.
Yeah, having that long-term view. Okay, so final question here. Any hot tips other than the amazing things that you've already given the audience already, but any other hot tips that you might want to provide for managers?
So I would say management sounds really hard and really complex, and there's lots of frameworks and coaching and whatever. But my fundamental principle is just treat someone the way you would want your manager to treat you. So if you just come from that really basic place of how would I want someone to talk to me, how would someone get the best out of me, then you've got kind of a good starting point. But also get the resources, and this is not just a plug for Manager IQ, but get that, like learn, right? So there's ways of doing things that have been proven over time work. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. Learn, apply it, see what works, keep going. That's what I would say.
Oh, I love that. And I think leadership and management is a lifelong learning journey. So I think that's such a great tip that you mentioned it. And the whole world evolves so quickly, and you get different cohorts of people that are coming through your organization as well. And also just to refresh your own practices, so make it even more exciting for yourself. I think learning and reading books, or doing courses, or there's so much raft of information on LinkedIn, whatever it is, just being more curious and recognizing that the more that you learn or evolve is just going to help yourself as well as your people. So I love that hot tip. I've been doing a lot of learning through Manager IQ, that's for sure, just kind of building everything.
And the thing is, I think when we're in a learning and a curious mind frame or a mindset, we'll give things a go because we won't be so worried about failing. Sorry. Oh, now my voice is failing. But if we put so much pressure on ourselves to get it right because we're worried we'll fail, then we're never going to learn. We'll stay in our little bubble of safety and security. So I've always kind of taken the approach to go, okay, well, I'm going to learn, I'm going to try, I'm going to be curious, I'm going to ask questions, I'm going to get feedback, knowing that some of that I'll get wrong. And I have to manage my own ego around that because obviously no one's perfect. But you're much more likely to grow and develop if you say, I'm just going to experiment and play with this for a while rather than I have to get it right. Obviously, you choose your circumstances because there are some times, like if you're walking into an executive meeting, that's not the time necessary to try and play something new. So you time it, but if you can keep your sort of mind open to, I'm going to try some things and I'm going to give a bit of experiment, then you're more likely to keep learning and growing and, use the technology that's available to you. And the sky's the limit.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. And Dani, how can people get best in contact with you if they wish to chat post this this conversation?
Absolutely. So thank you for your time. We're at pioneera.com. They can email me, Danielle@pioneera.com. We keep it very simple. We're also on LinkedIn. So we're a LinkedIn group. Our LinkedIn sort of company page is Pioneera Group. So just look for the P with the line underneath it, and that's us. So yeah, please come and follow, come and join, give it a try. We're really helping people. We're helping improve engagement. We're helping reduce burnout. So love to have people come on board and change the nature of the workplace with us.
Well, thank you for all that you and your organization are doing. It just sounds like such an amazing, meaningful vision that you have there. But thank you so much for your time, and look forward to chatting to you again soon.
My pleasure. You too. And thank you for doing great work in Manager IQ too, Lex. So yes.
Thank you. All helping people, aren't we? We're just trying to help those who need a little bit more, which is great. All right. Take care.
You too. Thank you.